Everyone could take their seats, please. I call to order the meeting of the Westmont Community Unit School District 201 tonight, Tuesday, September 27th, 2011, to regular board meeting. And roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Ms. Caparelli? Here. Mr. Charleston? Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
Okay, if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing a student discipline issue.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Present and yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Okay. You could take your seats, please. We will reconvene the meeting. Okay, 7:08. Okay. The next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. August 23rd, 2011. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the August 23rd, 2011 Committee of the Whole meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the August 23rd, 2011 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the August 23rd, 2011 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Then August 30th, 2011, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the August 30th, 2011 special meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
Okay. Motion carried. September 6th, 2011, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 6th, 2011 special meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the September 6th, 2011 special meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. September 13th. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 13th, 2011 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the September 13th, 2011 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. At this time, are there any public comments? Then we will conduct the public hearing on the 2011-2012 budget. And I call to order the public hearing regarding the proposed 2011-2012 budget.
Okay, this evening I have the 2011-2012 final budget for you to look at. Okay, first of all, we'll start out with our revenues by source. Our total revenues in all funds is about $26.7 million. And as you can see, property taxes account for almost 77%. State revenue is about 7%. Federal sources just a little under 4%, and transfers 6.19%. The revenue assumptions the budget was based on is the tax levy for 2010 with a CPI of 2.7% and the 2011 levy with a CPI of 1.5%. As we all know, interest rates are at historic lows, and I just found out today that some of our investment rates dropped considerably. Got a notice from the bank. So while we were earning 0.65% on some of our money, now it's dropped to 0.4, which is still very good in this rate environment, but definitely lower than we had anticipated. We also had a decrease in general state aid as a result of the state proration, and our federal revenues have decreased as a result of the end of ERA grant funding. Total expenditures in all funds are just under $28.4 million. And again, salaries and benefits make up the greatest portion of our budget, just a little bit over 65% of total budget. And I have two sets of percentages there for you. The first one is, so salaries at 50.28%, that's a percentage of total budget. And the 53.39% is the percentage without the transfers. Again, purchase services about 10%. And one interesting thing to note is our tuition is about 7% of our budget, and that's for special ed placements. Expenditure assumptions that the budget was based on for salaries and benefits for the WTA. They're at step and lane credit. There was no increase on the base for this year. The WESPA contract, this is the last year of their contract. They had 2.7% increases in their contract. And the WCMA, their salaries are being held at the FY11 rates. That contract is currently being negotiated. And then all other employees, an average of about 1.6 to 1.65% increase. Medical benefits, 10% increase. Whoops. Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead. Okay, and we had reductions in supply, purchase services, and capital outlay budgets district-wide. We also reduced some special ed aid positions and decrease of 6 FTE teaching positions. In the operations and maintenance fund, we have included additional costs for anticipated architectural fees based on facility improvement discussions we're having this evening, as well as increases for utilities. Transportation fund has a contractual increase of 3.6% and an additional route. Capital projects includes all our summer projects, which was the ADA lift, domestic hot water boiler, ADA toilet partitions, burglar alarm replacements, our portion of the high school scoreboard contribution. And then I also built in some anticipated costs for summer 2012 work, because typically we start that in June and may even have some payments in June. And then life safety fund included the fire alarm system upgrades at Manning, Miller, and South elementary schools. Then there's just a quick fund balance summary presented for you. And the overall operating deficit in the education, tort, O&M, and transportation fund is about $368,000. If we look at the PMA model, which also includes the municipal retirement and the Social Security Fund, we have a deficit of $404,000. And then I also included a revenue and expense summary by fund for FY12, as well as a look at FY10 budget and actual. It's important to note that the FY10 numbers are unaudited, and we'll have a further update when we get the audit figures.
Where am I finding that document? Do I have that
In your
document? Oh, it's here.
packet.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you.
All right, and then key considerations for the final budget. Revenue projections are conservative. Current expenditures exceed current revenues in the operating funds. And the 11-12 budget is aligned with board and district goals to provide educational services to the students and families we serve. Any questions?
Are there any comments from the members of the board first? The budget?
So the short version of this is that the budget that we're contemplating passing is including the IMRF and Social Security funds, is $400,000 negative for this year for operating.
Correct.
Then there's another 820,000 plus or minus of capital projects that's going to bleed down our existing working
Right,
cash.
balances, right.
So at the end of this coming June 30th of 12, we're going to have approximately 1.2 million left in working cash and another 200,000 left in life safety. Call it 1.5. In
Yep.
cash, effectively in cash reserves, plus whatever our low point cash balances are
Correct.
in our operating funds.
So as we go forward, I mean, we continue to look for operational efficiencies throughout the district. And as we start developing the 5-year plan, again, we'll be meeting to see what types of things, we can do for next year in terms of creating more efficiencies.
When is the audit due?
Well, it is due October 15th. I don't have an update from the auditors on that. They have filed extensions in the past to November 15th. I am pushing for the October 15th deadline.
And generally, how far behind that do we have the PMA projection and the PMA?
We probably within about a month. So my goal is I've contacted them to try and schedule for the November meeting or the December meeting and definitely would like to have it by the December meeting at the latest.
Because ideally, then we'd start, the finance committee of the board could then start to have a conversation about what next year looks like.
Right.
And what implications that has going forward.
So Kim, just to clarify, the deficit number that we're going with is the 404,297?
That's what will be on the PMA model. Okay. The state one has the ed, O&M, and transportation. Actually, the state includes working cash as well. So everybody's got a little bit different pieces, the components that they include.
Okay.
At the last Finance Committee meeting, we talked a little bit about scheduling one, maybe October-ish. Do you still anticipate
Yeah.
to start reviewing that EPIRD?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions by the board?
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Kim, I have one more question. In the transportation fund, our ending balance is actually higher than our beginning balance. What's driving that? So when you look at education goes down, short goes
Because our
down.
revenues are greater than our expenditures.
Yeah, I get the accounting principle, but I mean, is that consistent? Has every year our transportation fund has gone up instead
No,
of down?
we levied more in our transportation fund because remember we had that audit adjustment last year with the way they were pushing revenue through and counting it in a prior year, but it really wasn't revenue we would expect to get until after that 60-day deadline. So we adjusted the levy. and to account for, to make up for some of that revenue, and also in anticipation of the state potentially, of the state reducing the amount of transportation funding and potentially not paying us some transportation funds. So that's a fund that we'll look at this year and decide if we need to adjust the levy and shift some funds maybe back into the ed fund.
Because that's actually making us a little bit better.
Right, but
If
we
you didn't
technically
count
could
the-
levy and shift that levy, though, to the ed fund and offset some of that negative there.
Okay, thank you.
As I recall, are we building that balance because it was effectively too low at the end of the fiscal year?
Yes, that, with
the
the
target?
audit adjustment. You know what, we want to have probably, we want to have at least 3 months of
Okay.
expenditures in there. And so we'll look at that again after we get the audit finalized.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. Are there any public comments regarding the proposed 2011-2012 budget? And the chair will declare that the public hearing on the proposed 2011 through 2012 budget is closed. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Any questions on the consent agenda? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, including personnel recommendations. Number 1. Number 2, approval of student tours. Number 3, abatement of working cash funds. 4, approval of September 27th, 2011 expenditure report. And 5, ratification of regular payroll.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
So under discussion items, the first, are we?
Yeah, I could just mention it briefly.
Presentation of administrative salary compensation report.
This is an annual report that will be found on our website every year. School districts have to report the salaries of anyone in a position that requires a Type 75 or administrative certificate. And so the board is receiving our copy of the administrative report. And again, this will be posted on our website.
Okay, then the next item is presentation of monthly financial statements for September 2011.
I had to get them all pulled up because I was doing my meeting's moving too fast tonight. That's all right, I've got it. Okay. All right. All of the, regular monthly reports are attached for your review. When we look at where we are as of the end of August, the state continues to owe the district $307,000 for FY11 categorical payments. We had August tax collections in the amount of $216,000, which is comparable to the amount that we received in August of 2010.
Just to be clear, FY11 is last year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Fiscal year 2011. And then the August payments to date, we've collected 51.4% of the 2010 levy. And the overall collection in fiscal year 2012 is approximately 2.2 lower than 2.2% lower than the past 2 years, and that's because the June distribution was larger than normal. In the education and tort funds, revenues are slightly lower than both the prior year and 3-year averages, and the majority of this is the result of the lower than normal tax revenue collections in the month of August. And again, the state's vouchered $213,000 of payments for last year that we have not received yet. And this is the same scenario the district's been operating under for the last 2 years. Operations and maintenance fund are just slightly below prior and 3-year averages. And in the transportation fund, variances continue to be kind of all over the place, and that's basically attributable to the timing of state reports or payments. And then the state has vouchered, again, almost $94,000 of transportation payments that haven't been released as of the end of August. And expenditures, again, we continue to have in the ed and tort funds comparable to last year. And in the O&M fund, they're slightly higher than last year, but comparable to the 3-year average. And again, this is just the result of timing of purchases for supplies and materials. And in the transportation fund, expenditures are lower than the prior 3-year average and higher than the prior year average. And again, timing of receipt of invoices from vendors and expenditures are where they should be at this time of year.
So Kim, just for clarity, we're a little over $600,000 the state owes us from last year.
No, it's 307.
What about the transportation?
It's all included in that amount.
So 93 and 213
Right.
equal 307.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and we didn't include catching that, if they actually pay us, cross your fingers, not back us.
Yeah, and actually, and
We don't budget for that.
We don't budget for
Okay.
that, because when we do a comprehensive annual financial report, so our accounting, our AFR is on modified accrual, so that report automatically assumes that we received that revenue in the year it was due, if they anticipate that we'll receive it within 60 days. And typically, they're assuming that that's what's happened. So we don't budget prior year. So that's why you have a difference between your cash and your accrual amounts.
So it's not that we don't budget for it, it's that we budgeted for it in the year
In the
it
year, right.
occurred, and we don't.
Right. And again, that's where when you're looking at budget to actuals, we're budgeting, when we do our revenues, we're budgeting the money that the state has said
Right.
there is due us in this year, and assuming that we're making the expenditures that meet that. Right.
So
the
we have
last
a
few-
whole nother set of dollar amounts for this budget year that we think we're getting, that we may also end up
Right.
in the same position.
And so you'll see, and one of the things I'm going to do too to make things a little bit easier is maybe even start reporting what percentage of our revenues we've received to date are prior year. And even set up separate accounts, because it helps track that so you can see where your revenue is coming from.
Do we have any kind of best guesstimates about this year's
We've
money?
actually received quite a bit of it. I just haven't updated. We received
Oh,
quite a
okay.
bit in the last couple weeks, but.
Great, okay.
Of last year's money.
Last year.
Yes.
Okay, great.
But they're
as of
similarly
August, we
slow
didn't
for-
have it,
yeah,
but-
But are they similarly slow this year as they were
Yes.
last year with respect to releasing this year's money? Okay.
Slower even, aren't they? Or no?
No,
Last year was
no,
pretty slow.
about the same.
Last year was really slow.
Okay.
Just slow.
Okay. So,
Is that- Okay. Next on the agenda, facility plan report, Mr. Cashman.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We wrapped up, about a week ago, our second facility committee. One thing that was interesting, I went back just to look back at the previous facility committee that started in January 2008 and this committee, and from my records, it looked like both of them together met 37 times. There was probably over 50 members of both the committees combined, and they met from January 2008. The first group met from January 2008 till June of 2009, and then this group started in April of this year and just ended a week ago. So it was a process where we kind of built on the past. We had a few members that came from the old committee onto the new, but it was a good discussion. We had a lot of information from the previous facility committee that we could talk about and refer to. And one major goal of the committee was to come up with some short-term recommendations that we felt we could pass along to you for your consideration. And the document I have in front of you, this is our kind of our summary of those recommendations. And we have short-term, mid-term, long-term recommendations, short-term being something that the committee felt would be important for completion next school year, before next school year. And then midterm going out 2 to 5 years, and then long-term more 6 to 15 years, or 6 to 10 years. I will kind of pass through the purpose and get into some of the more details of this. One area, and this was these guiding principles are something we talked about a lot to try to use as far as criteria to see is what we were talking about, because our discussions, ranged all over the board, from mechanical equipment to classroom sizes to educational styles and curricula to technology. So we wanted to have something that as a group we all kind of believed in, regardless of what facility issue we were talking about, so we could kind of go back to and see, okay, does this comply with that? This list of guiding principles kind of evolved over the last series of meetings, but class sizes was a big one to try to, because as we got into our kind of discussions in this summer, was the disparity between some of the class sizes at Manning and Miller. So that was something where we felt it was important to try to create equitable class sizes, always focusing on trying to improve the learning environment. You'll see we had comments about form following function. We really feel whatever this committee came up with, we think it's really important for the educators, for the teachers, and the principals and the administration to really look at what our ideas were and see if they agree, and whether you agree and the community agrees, because there was so much to go over that sometimes it was actually overwhelming. But we felt that regardless of what ideas we might have, that's really important to consider is, what does this do to improve that learning environment between that student and teacher, and does it make sense in the long term? Is it fiscally responsible? Because almost any problem, there's multiple solutions. So we wanted to be open-minded to that these are some ideas, but obviously you could have other ideas. And we were actually, as a committee, that was probably one of the most exciting things, was to kind of wrap this up, because now we'd like to hear what you have to say and other community. One thing I got to say, you have a very engaged community. Usually, especially facility committees like this, we're large and we keep meeting at night, and there's other strategic planning meetings going on. Usually over time, the group gets smaller. We had the exact opposite happening in our group, where we started in the mid-20s, and by the final meetings, we were in the mid-30s. And I think that's really a testament to this community and the school district, that people really care, and they wanted to come out and voice their opinion or hear what was going on. So that was really a nice thing to see. Equity across schools was something we really thought was important, that it is a school district, and that if for whatever reason, if there was a problem at Manning and we're going to do something there, we wanted to look at Miller and see, okay, are those students getting similar equitable educational environment, because the buildings are not the same. Manning has some weaknesses and some strengths that are different than what Miller has as far as weaknesses and strengths. So we try to look at that and keep that in mind. And I talked with the group and told them that usually with most school districts with multiple buildings, that's a common theme, because you represent the entire community. So if you're doing something, you want to be able to touch as many students as possible. That was actually also another reason that we have a recommendation in here to try to act quickly. There was a lot of talk about how this has been discussed for a while, back to 2008, before that, through strategic planning, and that every year another group of students are graduating from the high school, and are we doing something to help them? And that could be small steps, baby steps, or larger projects, but that to do something was important. Safety and security, those are two items that whatever we did, we thought it was important to integrate that into the solutions. Accessibility is a constant issue with the district, but is becoming more focused with children that are attending Manning, children that have attended Miller, the junior high, the high school. So we want to make sure that whatever we do, we try to constantly improve the accessibility of your educational programs. Building maintenance, we thought it was crucial that as a board and as administration that you establish and maintain funds that are adequate to not only do corrective maintenance when something breaks, but to have funds available to do preventative maintenance so that you could, in a way, reduce those failures over time. Energy efficiency, especially with these economic times, we thought that looking at opportunities, whether that's lighting upgrades, any kind of water conservation, energy conservation, insulation, that all those would be important. Fiscally responsible, that whatever solution we're looking for from an educational, like learning environment, that it's a pragmatic solution, that we weren't looking for creating extensive solutions, but something that is very durable, long-lasting, and that serves the needs of teachers today and teachers in the future. Technology, obviously, is an important part. It's constantly growing in the district. Flexibility, we think that's crucial, that whatever we do today, that we create spaces that are flexible for different teaching styles, changing curricula. And then also looking at community allies. You were talking about the scoreboards earlier, where you have the boosters supporting you. You have these different groups that have been working with you, the playgrounds you installed with help from the Park District, that we really think it's important for the district to try to foster those relationships, especially when almost every public body is having financial issues that possibly together there could be some solutions that benefit everybody. A couple assumptions, because this is where it got tricky, is if we didn't make some of these assumptions, we couldn't even move forward. And it was important, like Manning was an early discussion. We looked at the previous report I did for the board as far as renovation replacement study on Manning, renovation costs. And as a committee, we felt like we agreed early on that we're going to assume that Manning is staying, that we're not knocking the building down, creating a whole new school, that Manning would stay and it'd be renovated. So that's an important premise that everything was built on by the committee. Enrollment boundary, we just felt that was something that would be, that we were assuming that it was staying where it is. Though you'll see later that as far as just a district recommendation, we wanted the board to study that, whether it's voluntary or a permanent change, to look at that, because that's one way you can handle enrollment imbalances without having to build anything.
Steve, if I may,
Yes, sir.
and I apologize for the interruption. So just stepping back for a second to Manning stays, which I completely understand, but curious about the scope and nature of the conversation that happened or didn't happen about the prospect, because one of the conversations was constructing one building, effectively just a single, elementary building, recognizing the limitations of Manning and Miller. And I'm just entirely curious about sort of what that conversation looked like, or where it went or didn't go, because it just feels like regardless of what we do, we're going to have to put the bucket in the well pretty hard.
We made copies of the entire renovation replacement study that we did, the cost estimates, the drawings, all that, presented that and explained that to everybody in the committee. I can't say that the committee spent a whole lot of time talking about one large, elementary grade level center. In a way, it was just almost too unwieldy for the group to make that kind of call. Another thing that we were always present or kept in mind too, that there was a strategic planning process going on, and that there were financial facility issues being discussed at a strategic level, and that we wanted to be in keeping with that, but they were parallel tracks. So it wasn't like we were able to see the solution, the end of that, and then move forward. So the idea of one large elementary building was not discussed very much. We talked about a million different scenarios, but whether you're neighborhood schools, grade level centers, we talked about changing the schools, but I don't think that was really a scenario that was discussed a whole lot by the committee.
Because it just seems interesting in the sense of the conversation about overall equity, that would be a fairly unitarian approach to that question as well as the facility question.
Right. I mean, we really let the committee, it was majority, I'd say, would be community members, and we had staff members, myself, Kevin, Kim, Mike, the discussion really was driven by,
Just keeping the existing facilities.
yeah, and there's probably, the probably reason is that's what's familiar.
Right.
That's what people know.
And I think one of the reasons why that discussion wasn't entertained very long, as part of Steve's report, he had cost estimates for a K-5 building, one building for the district versus renovating existing structures. And I think the committee, when they saw those dollar amounts, it kind of, they decided that wasn't the course of action, rather work with the buildings we currently have and make them viable.
It's just quick recollection, it was 320 a square foot, something like that, to construct a new building.
I would have to look.
Okay. Good enough. I just wanted to ask. Thank you.
I mean, and we actually, we didn't study that when we did the previous report, so, they could have possibly extrapolated that, taken the cost of a new Manning school, figure out how much bigger it would need to be.
Yeah, my
but-
recollection was it was something where you effectively had done a report for the board.
Correct.
Where you said, hey,
Right.
look, this is what we spent building a new building.
Those, when it got to the finances, it was a challenge for the committee,
Yeah.
because, it could kill any kind of discussion about anything, because especially in these economic times, people were not looking for expensive solutions. So, it was a different environment, and discussing it now versus January 2008, that was a totally different world back then. So,
Just as an administrative question, there's several differences between the draft, which we had up until late this afternoon, and the final. Out of curiosity, how were those changes or?
this is the same document that,
No,
What he's referring to,
Several changes.
what was shared with the board was the document that was shared with at the start of the final meeting.
Oh, correct.
Steve had a summary of the work done to that point.
Yes.
And then based upon the conversation at that meeting is where this most recent document came from.
Good.
correct.
Kind of give the board a little bit of background, we provided you with that, I think it was draft number 4 or something.
Right.
And so then today, Steve completed the final draft.
So,
Basically, what we ended up-
changes between draft 4 and today, just.
Correct.
How were those processed?
From the committee.
From the meeting. Basically, what we ended up doing as we were, getting near the end of our process, trying to come to you, either our hope was either September or October, was we put together first an outline of, okay, how are we going to even talk about this? Are we going to go just one school and then focus on that?
That's fine, I was just curious.
So we
about
started hanging things, and basically each meeting, we looked at a draft and then talked about it, took straw votes, and really tried to get a sense of consensus. And then basically, I had a separate copy where I'd kept notes from the last meeting. I integrated those into this document you have in front of you.
So this document is the summation of
Correct.
what the,
There were things that we had, like in different locations, they wanted to move it. There was a lot of discussion. The previous one would have really confused it, because we had, just for one building, we had like 3 different recommendations for, different variations of the same thing. And as a group, we struggled with that on what could we get consensus around. So the last item there was, the idea of doing something quickly. So what I thought I'd do, and this is up to you, what you want to get into, thought I'd go through, just quickly through the short-term recommendations, district-wide in each building, and then kind of come back to the beginning. I'd be more than happy to jump to midterm. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up as you ask questions, we talk about it, but just in light of whatever you have in your agenda tonight, I thought that might be a decent way to approach. So I'll go through it quickly, and then I thought I'd come back to the beginning, and then feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like.
Just before you start, a quick question about the assumptions. It really seems there's only assumptions about the elementary schools. Were there not broad assumptions that you made about the junior high or the high school as part of this process?
I think we felt less challenged. I mean, I'm speaking for the committee, but this was really the committee's recommendations. I think there was much more uncertainty and variations on what could happen from, pre-K to 5 versus we felt like the junior high, and you'll notice here the junior high really is not showing up very much in these recommendations, but then we really talked about what's occurred there in the last 5 years plus, and that building, because it was fairly stable. The future was known that there was improvements made there that have not occurred at Manning or Miller. South was a huge wild card. I mean, there was plenty of discussion about South because, being open, closed, possible future uses, you name it. I think we probably talked about every possible scenario related to South. And then the high school, there were pressing issues there, probably the biggest one being the open plan, open classrooms. Other issues, but that was probably the one that took the most focus, simply because it seems to have the biggest impact on education versus some other items that we would view more as less important or less critical right at this point in time, and that there's been other improvements. Like we talked a lot about security at the high school, but we've been, in the last few years, there's been upgrades, video surveillance, there's been alarm system improvements, other improvements there to help security. So, we talked about that. But I'd say the elementary schools were really the South being closed currently or rented out, and then Manning and Miller, there was a lot of talk about them.
Thank you.
And I think it reflected just issues that were going on with the community. Okay, so with district-wide recommendations, one was, as I mentioned slightly earlier, was the idea of investigating voluntary or permanent enrollment area revisions. And I shared with the committee, a number of our clients have gone that route, and it's certainly not a simple solution. There are all kinds of ramifications. People buy houses in certain streets and certain locations because they don't know where their child's going to go, or they have a relationship with that school, and moving boundaries is tricky. So we simply wanted, as a district-wide recommendation, that we felt it was worth your study to see what benefits or not would be related to that. There's a lot of talk about, however you move forward, that providing extensive materials and documentation to number one, kind of support whatever it is you choose to do, and then to financially lay those numbers out, and then to also be able to build community support. I think the group really felt that whatever decisions ultimately are made, that they wanted it to be something that could get support and that would go forward without a whole lot of contention. But that was something, as we talked about, is that how important it would be to have that kind of communication. Grade level centers was something that kind of came up and went away and came up, was the idea of, right now you're a neighborhood school model on the elementary side. And though we did not recommend, there were people in the committee that wanted to recommend going to grade level centers. The majority did not, but they felt it was important to at least investigate it. And we also, I think as a committee, that however you move forward and what you do, that it's always going to be part of the discussion, because it just is an openness to, how can we do things differently? There's other, school districts around here that grade level centers. How could that change how you handle your facilities? So that we really saw as just something that would be important for the board and the community to investigate.
Did you just say the majority didn't support investigating grade level centers, or was it?
No, everyone felt it was worth investigation, but even during our kind of deliberations, there were people that felt they wanted a recommendation in this that you go to grade level centers. But the majority of the group would not support that. I'd say, it was a good democracy. I mean, sometimes we literally had, 50-50 votes, so that we'd move on and go, okay, well, now what do we do? Sometimes we'd have a vote where we'd have everybody in favor of it and one or two outlier people that were opposed to it. And then it was important as a group to find out why. And I thought it was it was always very civil. I thought it was really a great committee. But there were plenty of ideas to run around. That's where looking at all the other variations of this was kind of fascinating. And the fact I was really proud of the group that we were able to get to some kind of consensus. And I think we really focused more on, okay, short term, because the further you go out, the harder it is to really talk about, what are you going to do 10 years from now. So on short term, related to each of the buildings, the number one recommendation on a short-term recommendation would be to move the district administration out of Manning to South. Something that emerged during the process was the idea that Marker School District 60 was looking for an opportunity to possibly share administrative space. So that actually, it was interesting as a group. I would say once the group heard about that, it was even more enthusiastically supported, because they saw it as an opportunity for a couple school districts to possibly share construction costs, operational costs, and that made a lot of sense. Related to that, then there's a number of dominoes that fall. Interestingly, we went back to the previous facility committee, and during our original deliberations back in probably 2008, we stopped as a committee and actually wrote a letter to the board, or it might have been early 2009, where we recommended moving the administration, because as we were talking, it seemed like one piece of the puzzle, if you made that move, that then other things could happen. And ironically, it kind of emerged here also, because especially looking at the enrollment at Manning and the enrollment at Miller, the idea of gaining, just like even where the business office is today, to free up one classroom, they saw as significant. And then other things. For years, there's always been a desire to get the computer lab integrated with the library, and that suddenly the superintendent's office would free that up. So we talked about every possible scenario, from hoping somebody would donate a building for the administration, to renting space, to high school, junior high. We were looking for a home, but ultimately the group settled on the idea of using South. And I think there was a large group that felt, to have some District 201 use of South is really a benefit versus even leasing it out. That to make it back as part of the school district more actively was really important. So by doing that, it allows you on the first floor of Manning.
Can I interrupt for just a quick second?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I just ask if this is a good time, or if we're not? Are those conversations moving forward with Marker? Does that seem like that's a viable option?
They're open to the conversation, and,
Okay.
and based upon the board's direction this evening, we would follow up with that. And
Given that it's related to the lease of real estate, which is an exception to the Open Meetings Act, and obviously for our own purposes, I think that's a conversation I'd definitely like to have, but like to have it enclosed.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Sure. So some of the dominoes at Manning that would fall is, number one, the superintendent's office, which is to the west of the library, that general area could become a computer lab, which is currently on the second floor. The business office, which is basically a standard classroom that was converted into the administrative use, could become an additional classroom. Up on the second floor, it's really the old science lab area of it, the building when it was a junior high. There's abandoned casework in the room. Not a whole lot of improvements ever been made in the space. There's a gifted classroom, a special ed classroom, and a computer lab occupying that area. This recommendation looks at renovating that area and creating 2 large classrooms, because there was also earlier in this document about classroom size. Manning's a unique example where you have the newer wings, you have a larger classroom, say in the 900 square foot range. The further back in time you go, when you get back to 1927, they're in the 500 square foot range. And that just allowing something to move to where you could create 2 big classrooms and then move a class from a smaller classroom to a larger classroom, the committee really felt that would benefit the teacher, the students, and it would be a better use of the building. So that shows up here in this recommendation. Another similar issue here was the reading room, which is in the 1960s portion of Manning. Again, to move that program into the older part of the building where there's smaller spaces, and to then use that space for a classroom. Trying to really get the best use out of Manning. And basically, as you go north, the classrooms improve at Manning. Another idea was, and this was really, there was a lot of debate about this idea of anything early childhood. But one thought was to free up the current, right now it's basically a standard classroom. It's not designed for kindergarten, but it's like an old first grade classroom on the first floor of Manning. It has First Start and a half-day kindergarten program operating in it. Was to look at the possibility of relocating that to South, that then you would free up 2 classrooms in Manning for your use, either for taking smaller classes and move them into these larger classrooms, or for taking, if you have a overcrowded class with a number of sections, that you could have the option at least of reducing those class sizes by adding a teacher and getting through, kind of the hump until enrollments go back down. So that was another one. Air conditioning arose later in the discussions, but it was interesting. The group, and this really actually started probably out of a group of Miller parents, was the idea of having the PTO or parents group donate window air conditioners and have the district pick up the cost of the electrical upgrades to support them as a short-term solution to hot classrooms. Miller, basically, most of them are unair conditioned. The south exposure, those ones really suffer. Manning's more of a hodgepodge, especially because some spaces had been occupied by SACID and they put in air conditioning. And I even this summer when we were walking around doing the fire alarm project, I thought it was odd where I'd go into another classroom in the same grade, and one had air conditioning and one didn't. And a teacher was setting up, and I kind of teased her, like, well, how did you get that? What kind of pool, do you pick straws or flip a coin? How did you figure out you got the air-conditioned classroom? And they saw it as a short-term solution because you'll see the overall mechanical renovations, those costs that were in the renovation replacement study they did for you, those were all pushed to midterm or longer recommendations because of just the cost. The committee really felt, even though they thought it was important, that not now. So this was done, first it showed up at Miller, and then at our last meeting, the group felt that it should happen at both buildings. And then another area, this was really important, this was actually probably where the recommendation back in 2009 from the previous facility committee about doing something with South was service providers, aides, students, where you're pulling students out of a classroom and providing specialized service. Right now, there's no place for that to go. They're in hallways, they're in corners of classrooms, they're in closets. I mean, it's not really appropriate. And as a group, we really felt that whatever we did on any building, that we really need to create some small group space so that can be done in a more dignified and appropriate way for those students. Miller. At Miller, this was really looking at taking, number one, the library. Obviously, there's a number of areas that are viewed as deficiencies in Miller, especially in comparison with Manning. Library, number one, it's really actually currently in an old storage room that was converted. It's up a half a level, so it's inaccessible even with the lift in the building. And they really felt that this could be a large improvement to Miller to create a new LMC over in the West 1970s wing and create a new library, a new computer lab, and a new kindergarten classroom in that general area. There was a lot of discussion about the kindergarten classroom, mostly about when. The kindergarten classroom you have at Manning is superior to the one at Miller in size and the fact that it has direct exiting to the exterior for young children. It has a more appropriate bathroom that's adolescent bathroom. And we looked at the renovation replacement study, and the group saw that if you ever install an elevator as part of a renovation at Miller, there's really a small area in the building where that can work, where you can hit all three levels, and it's basically on the east side of the kindergarten classroom and the classroom above. So the thought was, if you're going to do some work, make it part of this at the same time in anticipation for that being somewhere down the road, and then on the short term, you've improved that kindergarten classroom. You've made it a better space and a safer space and more accessible. You would then take the kindergarten classroom. There's that idea that it would be some kind of small classroom, small group space, either for like the accelerated math program, SACID, student services, and then basically the old, that current library being up a half a level, that would be more appropriate as an adult space, so that we'd make that into a faculty workroom, district storage. There's a big need of storage at Miller, and a staff lounge. So we'd move them. They've been moving around ever since I started working with you. I think they've been in 3 spots. So we'd finally have a spot, and probably the best use of the space, where it make it an adult space, and then create put all the children in the accessible portions of the building. Again, the temporary window air conditioners and looking for space for service providers. An example of that is if you did do a renovation, create a new library, it might be possible to create some small meeting rooms that back up to the library but are adjacent, that entered off the corridor, so that those classrooms in that level, that they could pull a student out and go into an appropriate space and have a small meeting with them, or have some type of interaction like that. Down across the tracks to South School. So this is really looking at South, the idea of creating some kind of administrative relocation there. And it really did change the conversation a lot, the idea of Marker possibly being in the mix. Because we talked about it, everything from how cheap could it be done, how could we get, Kevin and his team over there with the least amount of construction, kind of taking the spaces that 99 is using right now for their transition program and putting them into, basically classroom spaces, relocating office equipment, furniture, and partitions, to putting them in the classrooms on the north side, on the lower level on the north side, just temporarily, and leaving District 99 there. And a lot of talk was about if there's going to be a future of South with children there, if it was going to be some type of early childhood program, is not putting the administration anywhere in the north where the standard classrooms are, is putting them, on that south upper level so that you could take the best classroom space and use it for children. One thing that's important that we talked about here on timing is if you, decided to do an approach like this, ideally, especially if you want to, do something at Manning, say like next year, that ideally, especially, it would be to get at South during the spring of this coming year, from like January to June, so that as soon as school's done, the administration could move over a weekend, and you could start renovation at Manning. If they're still in Manning, it's going to become a problem, of getting the projects done, and basically you have 50 days in the summer to do all that work, and so that's where we have, in here, we talk about this being a short term, but the idea is that it would literally start in January. And then really what I'd call like the lower level of the first floor of South is some type of early childhood program. And this could be everything from as simple as, if you're familiar with the building, your previous tenant, they put a partition up in the old kindergarten classroom with the clock on the floor. So right now it's 2 spaces, but it's still, with that wall gone, it can go back into a kindergarten classroom. With a low level of investment, you could, in a way, turn it back on just the way it was when you turned it off. And close that as far as an elementary school. But you would have, 1 kindergarten classroom, and then you have 4 standard classrooms. There's some window units that have been installed, and you could use the fact that you have administrators at the upper level and not have the expense of a principal for the building. But it could go anywhere from that to, we talked about the idea of all-day kindergarten offerings, and that's where you'll see the way we describe it in here is really something that we feel like really needs to be studied. Because it was interesting talking with the group about this is, your motto, you're a unique school district, and the idea of when we had some task forces that would break out and just brainstorm on a school. And South was interesting because when they came back, they said, well, maybe we can do something unique to Westmont, 201 with South that the surrounding communities don't have. And there was a focus about, okay, right now you only offer half-day kindergarten. If you went to all-day kindergarten offering, like whether it was just 1, how many people would be interested in that? Could it kind of support itself? What about preschool? We looked at the Park District and what they were doing in the, I was going to say Red Barn, but where they offer, they're limited in space, so they have a, Monday or Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday offering, and that's it because they don't have enough space. Is there something that could be done? So, and then we even, we started hearing about Marker, is that something they would be interested in? So that issue in here, and I tried to phrase it properly because we really got hung up as a committee about what could we agree on, is the idea that, in some, at some way level, it makes sense, but exactly what we felt it really needs to be, there needs to be a demonstrated need. It needs to be something that makes sense from the educational point of view of the district, and that makes sense financially, and move forward. And we, one thing that also emerged was this Capital Development Board grant where you could get up to $5 million in construction dollars with a 10% matching if you enhanced your early childhood offerings within the district, improved that need, and satisfied their requirements. So that was something that we kind of developed as we were going through this process, and we noted it in here. And here, like this possible, this is we're looking at, this would be like the baby step where you basically could just free up that one old first grade classroom at Manning by taking that First Start program and that half-day kindergarten and having it take place at South versus at Manning, or it could be more extensive if you chose to go that route. The junior high, as I mentioned, not that we forgot about it, Ron attended all the meetings and was a good advocate for the school, but we really felt like because there's been such improvements there already with the new principal's office as far as security and operation and student services, the window replacement that's improved the building as far as glare and energy efficiency, new fire alarm system. We just replaced the toilet partitions and improved accessibility. We modified labs in the boys' restrooms to make it more accessible. So there's been some improvements there. We changed the divider curtain in the commons. You had a new gym floor put in there prior to us. We put the big fans in the gym, in lieu of air conditioning. So we felt like it's had some, it shows up, you'll see here in more of the midterm recommendations. And then the high school, that was, this looks simple, but this was debated a lot, was when and where should it be in the priority list. I think when I made our presentation to you before, when it comes to space and educational deficiencies, the high school certainly is up at the top. If that was an easier problem to solve, those classrooms would have been closed when they enclosed the junior high. The junior high, I mean, and if you're familiar with it, has odd-sized rooms. One classroom is 50% larger than it needs to be, and another one's okay. So there's like wasted space. But they were able to fairly inexpensively install partitions without having to redo all the mechanical systems, lighting, clock PA, all those, and enclose them. The high school, because of those concealed spline ceilings, the big sloping ceilings, the high-intensity discharge lamps, sprinkler systems, you name it, they've made little things along the edges, but they never got at it. So we talked about how important it is, but we also saw from the previous report that it's not inexpensive. It's not a $500,000 problem. It's a $4 to $5 million problem. So what we looked at as a group, because we talked also about this equity thing and trying to touch as many children as possible, was here is at least starting with the first step is doing the window portion of it. It was fascinating. I was part of your career day or whatever you call it. I think you have it every couple of years. And when they'd find out I was an architect, I mean, that was the first thing that these students would say is, can you put some windows in here? And it was just kind of intriguing. I mean, they're just young, men and women, but they're all aware of it. And then the staff, when we meet these staff members that have been there, 20 plus years, I mean, they don't know if it's night or day. It would be a huge change, the entire feeling of the building, by just adding windows. And it would still, the idea would be to place them so that it would not paint ourselves into any kind of corner as far as designing the classroom area, but would be, some step forward and the first phase of possibly a three-phase project. And that's the summation of the short-term recommendations. Then we went to midterm, 2 to 4 years, and then, if my recollection's right, and then 5 to 10 for long-term recommendations. I'd be happy to talk about any part of this draft, and in a way, I'm speaking for the committee. I really tried to kind of guide the process, but I was mostly curious to see what everyone else thought. I mean, I have my own opinions as an architect, but they're not my buildings. I don't have children there. I'm not going to be teaching there. And I really wanted to see what the community had to say, and it was really fascinating. We had every part of the rainbow covered, from people that wanted to do nothing, to people who want to do huge, broad strokes, everything from, selling buildings to leasing buildings to, moving the administration out to someplace on, Cass. I mean, you name it, we tried to find solutions. And it was a great group, and they certainly are it's an engaged community. So it was really a pleasure to work with the entire group.
Before we start on questions, I'd just like to follow up with something that you said in that, first of all, thank you and Kevin for having these meetings, because one of the things you talk about on page 3 is community support, and since through the years there's been so much input on this, I think the discussions that we're having, like you say, hopefully then that does go hand in hand with community support for the fact that as many people showed up to these meetings and were involved throughout these years. So I would just like to first, before we get into that, to say thank you.
Oh, it was interesting, too, because you had two, in a way, separate groups. There was some, minor, common threads, but a lot of people were new. And the discussion, in many cases, we started all over again with the second group. But then, we just let them kind of debate and talk about and, express what their feelings were, and then, got to these recommendations. So there were some common things here. There's definitely some variations, and then things have changed. You've actually done additional improvements over that period of time. So, I mean, you continue to improve the junior high. You improve the safety at Miller, Manning, and South with new fire alarm systems. So you've not, stopped. You've been continuing to do things at each building. So I think people were really supportive of that.
And then just for discussion's sake, one of the things that is for tonight, one of the action items is, after we are finished talking, is to authorize the superintendent to finalize short-term facility projects. So that's kind of where we're going for tonight's meeting. So, questions?
So a couple quick questions, if I may, because Kevin, I think there's a couple on the district-wide short-term recommendations that are directly relevant to you. which is the investigation of enrollment areas, evaluation of grade level centers in neighborhood schools, and then preparation of financing materials for whatever short-term work we do. What does your timeline look for that, and how does that unfold?
Well, first, as far as, looking at, grade level centers and boundaries and so forth, the one thing that I would say, and I think we've mentioned this at a couple of our different strategic planning meetings and facility meetings, because the question has cropped up there recently, and the thing that you want to be careful of is avoiding what I would call random acts of improvement, which school districts are famous for. And for instance, the concept of grade level centers, in absence of a vision, to just implement that concept, the only thing you can guarantee is that you'll level your class sizes. You would not reap any other benefit other than that, and if it's absent of a true vision. With a true vision, then some of these things that are being discussed and need to be investigated, they truly can have an impact on the school district. So I guess the response would be that we first need to nail down, right now we're focusing on high quality teaching and learning. We need to nail down our vision there, and then we go down the road and investigate these things and see which options truly bring us along that continuum of high quality teaching and learning. In terms of timeline, our strategic planning process, we are reaching closure there. I would imagine in the next couple of meetings we'll wrap that up, and then we'll be able to start taking a look at some of these other options. The financing piece portion of that, one of the things, once the board kind of says, yes, Kevin, work with Steve, and Kim, work with Steve, then the process becomes one of where Steve now needs to sit down with members of our school district and flesh out these ideas and come up with some more specific costs for some of these things. And then Kim and I take a look at the funding options and financing options and different scenarios for the board to consider. And so, we need to talk with Steve and put together that timeline. But if truly we're looking at moving forward with some of these projects and looking forward to start some of them after the first of the year, then I would imagine November at the latest we would be having those conversations with the board so that we can start that process of bid and go through those steps.
So what I'm hearing is, to some extent, you're going to value engineer this fairly wide range in that time?
Well, and I'm glad, I'd like to comment on that. The reason it's so wide, because when I talked about the idea of even having any dollar amounts attached to this, it's like dollar amounts for what? Like I mentioned, like the early childhood aspect of South. That could be everything from, a very small project that you're doing yourself and that's not being bid out to, putting in, right now, if you just wanted a kindergarten classroom and 4 standard classrooms, you have them. All you need to do is take down a partition, but is that what you want to do? If you were going to go to and have more young children there, are you going to build bathrooms, adolescent bathrooms, and then are you going to get at the mechanical systems, other issues related to it? So the range, the high number is what I would call an extensive renovation, where you're really getting at all the systems and can deliver whatever, because I'm always hesitant when people, especially when the scope's unknown, is to come on with some low number and you go, oh, that's great, we can do that. And then when you really find out what it is you want to do, it's not that. It's a much more extensive. So I would take all the high numbers as by far the high level, and the low being, what is it, the scope that you want to do? The administration is a great example. If they move by themselves and that was just them, because of the roughly 9,000 square foot area that they could occupy, we could likely do that really inexpensively. We even talked as a committee about a temporary solution. Is it even permanent? But if you were going to do something with Marker where they want to make a long-term commitment, then it's a different scenario. And what do they want? I have no idea. We have not spent any time on it. We have not programmed it, designed it. And the only one that's even close to being straightforward would be the window replacement. That one, it's somewhere in that range, but I could have even made those ranges on some of those bigger than 50%, and I still would have been fine with it, because it just depends on the scope. So I think if you say there was one of them that you wanted to go forward, just pick, you picked one, and you go, well, we want to go forward with it, we don't want to spend nearly that amount of money. It's like, okay, well, how much money would you want to spend? And then we could either work from the budget back and decide, okay, what could you do for that budget? Or if you said, we don't know what the budget is, but we know we want to do less than that, then we could move forward. Or you say, we don't even know what you want to do for the budget, we could then work with the group, come up with a program, come up with some design options, and then put hard numbers to them. This was try to give you some idea that, whether the project's a $50,000 project or a $500,000 project. But this is a very large, paintbrush.
So Kevin, it's a fair conundrum for Steve to point out, because we don't have either of these dollar amounts, low or high, available to us presently. So at a certain level, we have to sort of address this question of if we're enthusiastic about addressing these short-term recommendations right away, the whole notion of act quickly means that we sort of have to say out loud, how are we going to get the dough? And just as importantly, there's operational impacts associated with a number of these recommendations, and we need to say, here's the operational impacts as well. So, well, we can get to it when we get to the action item, but it feels like that may be a first domino for us, because if the question is, how do we get, between 3 and 5.2, how do we get $4 million just to do the stuff that we immediately want to do? We need to figure that out. In terms of the Capital Development Board stuff, we have a commitment in hand, as it were. And then there's a new conversation. I'm always suspect of new conversations, because the last time we applied for Capital Development Board dollars was in 2002, and we got a commitment letter in 2011. So, or 2010, whatever it was, late 2010. So, but with the bird in hand, as it were, the 1.2 million, clearly these numbers for the immediate work, fit that scope really well, in terms of providing CUSD dollars at 2 to 1 to the capital thing, so that we can do this work with state money as well. So I'm especially enthusiastic about looking at doing the short-term stuff, and in conjunction with your conversation about operational impact, because doing the work is one thing, funding the operations is another. And then secondly, your broader conversations about, the other district-wide recommendations as well.
Right. And along, our plan moving forward from this evening is to bring that information to the board. That, the one thing that you never want to have happen as a result of improvements to buildings or looking at programming, you never want to create something that's not sustainable, because then to start something and then have to pull back because of finances. And so anything that is proposed would have those operation costs as part of it, and with some thoughts about sustainability.
Steve, when I look at what you have done here, having the history of what has been done in the past, I found it just, let's say, previous committee, I find it very interesting that some of the exact same results are reached. And I really like something that you talked about. I wasn't somebody who was at a lot of the facilities meetings. Obviously, there's been a number of people, but one thing I really like is the talk that what can we do to be unique? And when you look at talking about taking right now our administration is kind of all over the place. And what we're looking at here, this work of the committee now, we're looking at doing a number of things, working with other local entities, school district, stone's throw away. Right. But also at the same time, looking at doing something that would be unique to our district. Right. And so the areas of talking about the early childhood, those were also talked about a couple of years ago, and talking about, in February of 2009, talking about the enormity of having a very good early childhood program is so beneficial to these students and consequently our entire district. And so I'm very excited, for one, to see that that has gone on through basically the two committees, because those kind of things, I think, are some of the things. One of the things we're talking about in the strategic planning is trying to be a small giant in our district. And so these kind of things, I think, really go to that, because it focuses on how we can be different.
Right.
And use the space that we currently have and try to achieve those goals.
Right.
So I'm very happy to hear that, and I know that I would be very curious to see where the studies go on all-day kindergarten, because I know personally a number of people that seems to perk up some interest.
Right.
So evaluating those kind of things. So I really, again, I say thank you for this work, because I think if you look at the assumptions, the equity across, we are a unit district.
Right.
I think putting windows in that high school is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. I don't think that there's anybody that would argue that. So as what you have presented to us, based on the facility committee's recommendations to us as a board, I wholeheartedly really like what I'm seeing, because I do think it talks about the educational needs of our students. None of this that I'm looking at is, for a lack of a better word, fluff. It is all geared towards educational experience of our students.
Right.
And I do look to hear from our administrators as to the ways to fund these things, because I also like how it's short-term, midterm, and a longer term, because as you say, if you start just talking big picture, you kind of never get anywhere.
Right.
So what you've presented to us, I think, is something that obviously has been talked about quite a bit. And so I'm excited to see what's in front of us here. So
The group was too, and the group also had the same questions and comments that Dan just had, that, how do you pay for this? What comes first? How do you fund it? That was a concern for everybody, but that was not something that the group could really get at. I mean, we turned to Kim, and I didn't, but the group turned to her plenty of times and said, well, how would this be paid for? I mean, how could you do this? But it was really focusing on, and I think that really started was just kind of the first move was always, is the administration in Manning the best use of your facilities? And the answer was always no. That just moving them anywhere was a step in the right direction. And then, can you even do all these short-term recommendations financially now, or do you go, okay, we can do this one and this one, we want to do these, but we can't do it currently because we don't have the finances. But it was definitely, that's always where it started, and it started with the last group also. And I think that was even with probably less of an enrollment problem at Manning than you currently have. So, that's really, it's been an anomaly having the administration there. If there was another building that wasn't a school where they could go, that was always something that was discussed and the group looked at favorably, because then it would give you more flexibility with what the future of South might be.
But I guess what I'm saying is that you have brought to us the facilities recommendations.
Right.
And so I, for one, think they're wonderful. And then I look to our superintendent and our business manager then to help us kind of put the puzzle together. Right. What can we do? How can we fund it? So.
Kevin, I have kind of a strategic planning question. One of the items on the front of this committee's documentation is about building on the district's goals as identified in the strategic plan, which we're in the process of that currently. Does the facilities group within that strategic planning, are they talking about what the prioritization is of where to spend money? So for example, we have, let's say, $3 or $4 million worth of projects, which are Miller, Manning, and South. Is that facilities committee, from a strategic planning perspective, talking about whether that $3 or $4 million should really go into the educational deficiencies at the high school, and that's our priority as a district, and then, going through some of these other items? I mean, because, you have that sort of chunk of money that we're obviously going to work really hard to identify. But from a strategic planning perspective, I don't believe that we as a district have even said what is our highest priority need as far as places where we have deficiencies. I think, Steve, you even mentioned when you started talking about the high school, you've expressed quite regularly the deficiencies from a classroom perspective, and then now they've got bumped to this sort of mid-range. Where does that discussion take place that says whatever money we are able to come up with, that this is where it goes versus some other need? You know, how does that happen?
Sure. And I can share with you that strategic plan, facility planning information's been shared, you know, and there are members of both committees, so you have that as well. But, you know, the strategic plan, when they discuss their goals, are a little bit more broad. And then, and typically then it's a facility planning committee, such as what we had, that kind of fine tunes that. The things that they have discussed is, you know, the importance of, you know, needs at all buildings being addressed, and that people seeing that versus, you know, that focus on one specific building. That's never been very popular. So, as you said, with limited resources and, you know, very easily any one of our buildings you could pump a significant amount of money into, and to date it's always been what can we do for all of as many of our schools as possible, and so that's more been the discussion. And I think what's more important is recognition that it just can't end with windows.
Right.
That it's got to, okay, short-term windows, but we need to right away roll into how are we going to address the other needs at the high school.
I would say without dollars being talked about, the committee really was hopeful that phase 2 would happen in year 2. That the high school, that wasn't like do the windows and then wait 5 years, but literally it was, instead of it being, because it could be a 2-phase project. I mean, if say you had, you know, $5 million just set aside to do the high school, first year would be the windows and phase 1. And that was actually a recommendation that was debated in the group, but the thought was that was maybe too overreaching, too expensive. The thought was, okay, windows in year 1, but then roll into at least study and move forward.
And I understand that. I'm really talking more about really at a strategic level.
Right.
You know, have we decided or committed that this is the first step, and that, you know, windows take the priority, and then these other elementary changes take the priority over, you know, another need that has been very clearly identified and documented for the 30 or 40 years that building has existed. You know, I'm just trying to understand,
Right.
where does that discussion take place? Because it doesn't really take place in the facilities committee. The facilities committees come up with recommendations for every building.
Right.
But at a strategic level, how are we deciding which direction we're pumping whatever money
Right.
tree Steve's growing in our district? $5 million, I'll take it.
Right.
If you can find that pot, we will gladly.
Right. Everybody
At
would
the
think.
strategic level, again, it comes down to the fact that the high school is such a difficult
Yeah.
problem to solve.
And has been for a long time, and I think that's been the reason.
It's not difficult to solve. Everybody knows what the solution is. It's
Right.
implementing that solution.
Right.
So in light of that, it's, you know, because
So one
we
more
don't-
time, we're going to back burner that, because Steve identified that, you know, if this was easy to do, it would have been done 20 years ago.
Right.
How
And
many more
Right.
times?
I think,
But I was in the minority
with
as
the
far as a
caveat
committee.
that it's got to be, it can't be allowed to, you know, fall to the wayside.
Right, right.
Or as Steve pointed out, not even 5 years is acceptable.
The one thing we did as far as kind of a committee homework assignment was we asked everybody to come up with their own short-term recommendations. And that was an interesting discussion because one of mine was that high school going at that aggressively, but other people, there really was a consensus among the committee that to address every level of your district, however you could. Whether that was taking the proposed projects and scaling them down, but trying to touch as many children as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's probably why the recommendation ended up being the way it was, but they certainly did not want, and we debated that at our last meeting, are we talking about, you know, does that go to a long-term recommendation? And the thought was, no, it's midterm, and that could be as soon as year 2. But obviously, we did not, that level or that kind of feedback, that was something beyond our committee as far as prioritizing those.
Shannon, I'm actually on that committee, and the question you have has come up a number of times. And it has come up that being a unit district, that we need to make sure that every school does get something. But it has, in the strategic planning facilities section, that talking about the high school issues.
And I'm not trying to diminish the needs at the elementary. I mean, I've spent more time in those buildings than anywhere else, and every single thing identified is, I mean, it's completely true. The library at Miller is in a storage closet. There's no way to reframe that to make it look prettier than what it really is. But I'm just trying to understand, even personally, I'm an elementary parent. It is very easy for me to fall into the let's do things at the elementary school because that's where I live every day.
Right.
And I don't live at the high school every day, and I want to make sure that there's some appropriate level of advocacy for people that do live there every day and do feel passionately about whatever the deficiencies may be or things that we want to overcome. And I'm not on that group. I'm not in the facilities groups. I'm doing other activities. So, just kind of curious how that balances out. Because it would be very easy for me to go in and say, I would really like my kid to not be in a storage closet for library once a week, but, that's more of a personal approach versus a strategic unit district approach.
But I guess that's why I'm saying, too, that I personally like what the Facilities Committee has done, because it does go along with the strategic planning facility concerns. So I'm just throwing that in there.
Just pure aside, utter tangent on Miller.
Sure.
And it's not in the recommendations, but the gym, where they have their gatherings, end of the year, middle of the year, beginning of the year. I've been there in June when it's 80 degrees out and it's about 110 inside that gym.
Right.
I was just there in September where it's 60 degrees out, and once you put 50 people in there for any period of time, it's about 75 to 80 degrees there. Was there any talk or any mention about fans for that space in the gym? Just out of pure curiosity.
Not by this committee, by Mike Mayoris and myself, yes. But not by this committee.
Just as a pure tangent.
I mean, there was just air conditioning alone was a big topic of discussion, that the group had consensus that these spaces for these children should be air conditioned. That not only would it help during the fall and spring, but it would maybe allow more flexibility, the ability to take that hot
the
gym
same thing
and rent it out.
For the Miller Gymnasium as well. I mean, the Manning Gymnasium
correct.
as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But those are spaces where public gather for extended periods, and it's just sweaty.
And the fans work really well at the junior high.
The junior high.
I mean, graduation at the junior high was very
out in the
bearable
audience
because
is
that
actually
fan
really
was
good.
running and it was very bearable, definitely.
So this the midterm and long-term recommendations, and, I don't have any questions other than this one because I was at the meetings.
Right, yes, you were.
The committee is not disbanded. There will continue to meet to discuss midterm and long-term, or are these final?
You're asking the wrong person.
Well, and that's, the committee will be, if there's a need to prioritize, we'll bring back the committee. And then periodically, we need to bring that committee back together just to update them on, okay, here's, as a result of your work, these are steps the district is taking.
Right.
So part of it depends on the conversation from the board and direction from the board. But I would, again, depending upon where dollar amounts come in, there may be a discussion among the board that, you don't want to spend those dollars in that way. And so then the committee comes back and prioritizes, okay, here's the exact cost, here's the pool of money, help us prioritize these.
Because at the risk of getting one step ahead of the economic conversation, if the immediate number is sort of, $3 to $4 million, we're going to somebody's well somewhere. If the second step is another 7 or 8, do we have to tackle that question of are we putting the bucket in twice or once? Mm-hmm. Because if we don't feel like there's a well to go to for the second piece, that's a different conversation as well.
Right.
mean,
Particularly if the second piece is, year two, that's really still short-term. I mean,
right.
year one and year two are right on top of each other already, so.
And when we talked as a committee, we didn't know necessarily what the next step was going to be. We thought that, it might depend on what your discussions are. You might have questions for us, other things to review, or you might want to, have us come together another time. The thought was it was truly like a draft document and hopefully a living document that it would, as you answer some of these questions, that you decide how you want to go forward, and then that could take the document and move something from short-term to midterm or change those recommendations. But it should be, in a way, a living document as you move forward, because just because something's a midterm, the issue as far as the principal's office at Manning or at Miller, those issues and those problems aren't going to go away. When you do them, and if you can't financially, does that become, a long-term goal, so that you don't somehow, make an investment now that you're going to tear out, 5 years from now. So that was actually what we were clearing out. That's where people were asking me. I said, I really don't know. But I think, you have a great group of people. They obviously, it was amazing. As every meeting went, we ended up with more people.
Well, that's the other thing that I wanted to say, because I was very excited. I just want to throw it out there. I am so grateful to the people who came. I mean, this is going to go down as the summer of meetings. Kevin. It's been busy. It's been very busy, and I am really grateful for people stepping up the way they did. I really am, and I have to say, I have heard windows and walls. It'll be so nice where we're hearing walls and not windows. I'm pretty excited about that, honestly. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, you do have a great group of people. So.
And I guess I'll jump in a little bit. I have some notes jotted down, and they're in no particular order, so things may be a little bit random. First, thank you to everyone who participated on the committee. I was there for almost all the meetings myself, so I feel like I had a lot of input into the process already, and kind of am on board with the recommendations that are coming from the committee, because they in part came from me.
Right.
A little bit to the point, I guess, that you were bringing up as far as strategic decision and that sort of thing. I think one of the board's charges, and we hear it said over and over again, is to decide who gets what and how much when it comes to money. And so I think part of that prioritization and strategic is the decision process we go through here at the board table. So I think that, for me, kind of answers that question. As far as grade centers, neighborhood schools, other options, I keep thinking back to the Ken Robinson video that Kevin showed at the strategic planning, and I think the climate committee. I've seen it a couple times at the different committee meetings. And what sticks in my mind is the conveyor belt of lumping students together by age and running them through the factory of our educational system. And everyone looks at that and goes, yeah, that's really outdated. That's really not what we want to be doing. So in the context of looking at grade centers, neighborhood schools, I think to a certain extent doing things differently and possibly looking into grouping children by ability levels might be something that is worth exploring as well, because that certainly seems to be a suggestion that people who were in attendance and at least saw the video were somewhat excited, and there was some conversation about that. So I think that's something, as far as a new paradigm to consider. As far as funding, we did have the meeting with Liz and talked a little bit about different bond options, so I don't feel like we're, I think we all kind of know where some of this money could come from, so I don't feel that we're, completely starting from the very beginning on that. I would like to see us utilize the $1.2 million that we have in this process, rather than kind of scheduling it out for projects down the road, where we may not have the matching funds to then utilize all of it. So if we can utilize most of it in this round, that would probably be my preference. The other thing I had, and again, it comes back to money and that sort of thing, is looking at the list of infrastructure type of projects that are on the midterm timeframe. And if there's any of those, say if you get firmer numbers on what we want to do, or any of those possibility to move up, some of those non-glamorous, projects, electrical, plumbing, bathroom remodeling, some of those needs that we've talked about over and over and over again, but, they're not as, not as fun.
Correct.
But they're certainly incredibly important. Just kind of scanning through here. In the section on Miller where it talks about air conditioners donated by the PTO, is that something that we have air conditioners that are already donated by the PTO? Does anyone know?
No, I believe where that comes from,
Just
Joel.
a kind of a thought?
Yeah, in the past, I think PTOs have come forward and asked to be able to do that.
Okay.
And the problem on the district's end
Was the
is
electrical.
getting the electric,
Okay.
either adding service to the building if needed, or at least getting more electricity to the classroom and the cost.
I mean, with something like that, this is my personal opinion, and the PTOs can certainly do what they want to do, but I really feel like as a district, that's kind of a basic, thing that we should be providing as a district, and we shouldn't be relying on PTOs to donate air conditioners. We don't walk into the bathrooms and see the toilet's been donated by the PTO or anything like that. So, I think, I'd really like to see the PTO focus on more of the traditional things that PTOs like to do, and that's enrichment opportunities, other educational initiatives, and that sort of thing. So anyhow, that was just kind of a side.
I think that was a little bit out of desperation too, because
And I understand that.
we have
I understand
almost
that.
no classrooms that are air
Yeah.
conditioned. There's literally one or two, really.
And I think that was how it was even discussed.
I think
Yeah.
the PTO agrees, at least based on my participation in the PTO over the last couple of years. The general agreement is that we would much rather not buy fans, which we have already done.
Right.
We'd much rather not buy air conditioners, but, sometimes desperate times lead to desperate.
And it did follow a hot week.
Yeah.
Is that something that could be added?
I mean,
in
that's
to the,
that's something that, as a district, we have a conversation about.
South. I've really made no bones about it. I really think we should have been using that facility for our students. I'm so glad that we've come to some sort of agreement that this is a good plan. It was February 4th of 2009, the last time this was kind of recommended.
Right.
And so I'm glad to see that really, after an additional round of discussion with a lot of new faces, that we came to that consensus as a recommendation to bring to the board. I think it's a solid one. Early childhood, I look around the room here, I know parents that have had children in early childhood, and I know, there's a lot of support for that in our district. Getting kids off on the right foot from the very beginning is absolutely critical to later success. And so, a commitment and solid commitment to that, I think, is imperative. I really think some credit should be given to Kevin for the conversations that he's having with Marker on the shared space. I think that is such a benefit to us as taxpayers, to Marker's taxpayers, to really look at how can we combine some of these activities that multiple school districts perform throughout our area and really bring some extra efficiencies by collaboration. So I really think that Kevin should be given a lot of credit for that. We go to the IASB meetings in November, and I remember very distinctly one of the keynote speakers, they tend to be the very motivational type speaker, an inspirational type speaker, and the topic of one of those first ones that I went to was, what if? And it was all about what if thinking, and that how you have to kind of think creatively and just throw ideas out there. And so to what if we combine some services with Marker and come up with a new plan, I think it's a great what if. I look forward to a little more input, certainly from administration and staff, as far as the programming that's going to be relocated to South or maybe initiated at South. I'd like to hear some additional thoughts on that, because as a facilities committee, you know, I'd like to see this, and my neighbor here would like to see this, and this one's got, you know, 4-year-olds ready to start kindergarten, and they want to see this. So I think it's a real, you know, from a program perspective, I'd like to really get some input, and I mean, my preference would be to utilize as much of that space to the benefit of our children as we can. It's just, it's there, and I think it's great space, especially for early childhood. When it comes to the junior high, I know we made no recommendations, but there was one item on the short-term projects list that I thought would have some educational benefit, and that was some sort of glass doors or something separating the commons area from the hallways.
For acoustics.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just something to toss out there that I thought that really, you know, if we can squeeze that in, it is one thing that would benefit, I think, the academic environment at the junior high at fairly inexpensive. Wait, let me think if I got anything else here that I wanted to mention. Overall, I'm, you know, very happy with the recommendations. And the other, one other thing I had is you talk about at Manning, you know, renovating the space where the special ed room is and down below where the offices are.
Right.
And moving them into the other space. But we never really mentioned anything about, are we going to do anything with the other space there, even if it's kind of minimal, to
In this,
spruce it up? And I know I think that's part of that maybe as you kind of finalize that is those conversations can go on, you know, what do you need in that space? Just say move the special ed room from where it's at now to there. Could be minimal things, and just I'm talking about simple things even like painting and, you know.
in the
lighting,
budget, I did carry costs for that, because I felt, I mean, if you're going to do that, who's to say that what's there is appropriate for them?
Okay.
You know, so I wanted to at least have that on the high-scale budget. We assumed that where we were moving to, that we'd take those spaces and do some work on them.
Okay.
You know, I'd call it like a low-level renovation, but we do something. And then higher level, obviously the highest probably where the old science labs were, you know, lesser, like the business office. You know, there's a lot of questions. You know, there's a vertical, you know, air conditioning unit in the corner. You know, what are we doing with that? I mean, what are we going to do with the room to bring it up to other standards? You know, what about across the hall? So I think there's all different levels there, but that's at least in that budget on the high side. We included that.
Okay.
I also want to take a minute and thank you, Mr. Cashman, and all the committee, Mr. Carey, for the work that's gone into this in our summer of meetings. I guess for me, the important piece comes here while you're here tonight, and it's the sustainability of whatever we choose and the financial support that we have to put together, which is key for me. So moving forward, that's where I want.
I think so.
Okay, Mr. Cashman.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda are
Do the action items.
action items. Board action on student discipline issue. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the administrative recommendation in the student discipline matter as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
The next thing is the adoption of the 2011-2012 budget. The chair will entertain a motion. Whereas the Board of Education of Community Unit School District Number 201, County of DuPage, State of Illinois, caused to be prepared in tentative form a budget, and the secretary of this board has made the same conveniently available to public inspection for at least 30 days prior to final action thereon. And whereas a public hearing was held as to such budget on the 27th day of September 2011, Notice of said hearing was given at least 30 days prior thereto, as required by law, and all other legal requirements have been complied with. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Education of said district as follows. Section 1, that the fiscal year of this school district be and the same hereby is fixed and declared to be the beginning July 1, 2011, and ending June 30th, 2012. Section 2, that the following budget containing an estimate of amounts available in each fund separately and of expenditures from each be and the same is hereby adopted as the budget of this school district for the said fiscal year.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McNair.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes. Direct superintendent to finalize short-term project. The chair will entertain a motion to authorize the superintendent to finalize short-term facility projects as presented.
Just to be clear that that includes direction to talk about financing alternatives as well as operational impact and the other recommendations related to attendance issues at the grade buildings.
I need a
So moved.
Second.
Second.
roll call, please.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Superintendent's report.
Superintendent's report, first with regards to strategic planning. The committees began brainstorming action plans for the strategic plan. And I think there was an acknowledgement, at least among the committee, that while they could generate ideas for that action plan, that, teachers and administrators who are kind of experts in those areas would take that work, refine it, and then bring it back to the committee for revisions. And so the next meeting is October 6th, 6:30 p.m. for the larger committee. And then we are pulling together a smaller group of, again, teachers and administrators who are going to be looking at the work that they did, and then, I guess, wordsmith it and then bring it back to the larger group. Climate Committee, originally we had a meeting scheduled for last night, but we postponed that. We're working with a woman, Ms. Rosinski from the DuPage, or Downers Grove Township, who works with their peer jury, which was one of the ideas that was suggested with our committee, and then also has done a lot of work with bullying awareness and tolerance. And so again, that's along the continuum that our committee wants to work on. And so right now, we're scheduled for October 17th. We're inviting her to work with that committee as well, or at least share her thoughts with our committee as we continue down the road. Some of those action plans are already in process. Mr. Carr is already implementing the principal's lunch, which, Steve, what is the date of? First one's Friday. First one's Friday. And so we are working on those plans. So for those short-term, high-impact ideas that can impact the climate of our buildings in a positive way. And then with the superintendent's coffee, the date that I have there, October 12th, I was kindly informed, is also the high school concert. And so we'll be looking at the 13th to have that 7 o'clock p.m. And for those who are here and listening, I typically have a kind of a topic or a discussion and then open it up to questions. But we will update, in light of the report that was presented today, we'll provide an update with that group as well. But I also want to talk about some of the things that we've been discussing with our planning committees in terms of that whole idea of becoming a small giant and some of the ideas that are being discussed. And truly, we talk about making our district a unique place for teaching and learning, and kind of discussing some of those ideas with a larger group as well. So hopefully we'll get some pretty good attendance, and I think it'll be pretty informative.
Where, is it going to be at the high school?
High school, yes. Yep.
Okay. The next item is board reports. I did have one quick thing that I wanted to say is I would like to commend everyone who is working on Emily's Hats Off for Cancer. And I say Emily, but it's the Hats Off for Cancer. I was I had volunteered my time to go over to the junior high on the day that they collected money. They've collected many, many, many hats, but they collected $1 for any student who wanted to wear a hat that day, and the junior high collected $467 in one afternoon. Obviously, then many people put in more than $1. And the high school collected $333 that same day. So that is a phenomenal amount of support from our students and our faculty for this cause. And then I know that Manning's Day is Friday. They're going to have that. Is there one? Do you know if Miller's doing one?
No, I don't think there's something scheduled at the moment.
So I just want to say that this is one of those truly wonderful things throughout our district, supporting one of our own students and the cause that she has selected. And I congratulate all the students and the parents and the teachers for working on this wonderful project. So, did anyone else have any other?
I had something I wanted to add. We all received an email from somebody recently, and part of the discussion, or part of the, not really discussion, but something that came out of it for me was the possibility that as the committees are kind of closing up and that they're in midterm someplace, that there's someplace on the site or on our district site that would give people who are coming on late or are trying to get updated to frequently asked questions.
Right, and that was suggested to me, and we're working on that. So all the information that was presented today will get posted on our website, and then also start generating that frequently asked question as well.
Any other?
Homecoming parade Thursday.
Homecoming
Homecoming
game Friday?
Yep.
6:30, the parade starts.
6:30. Downcast.
So a couple of things. Miller's Ice Cream Social was this past Friday, and we were very fortunate to have a number of board members who scooped ice cream and various other activities, and things went very, very well. I don't have the final numbers myself, but hopefully we can get some more information. But it was just a spectacular event, and there were a lot of people there outside of just our children and our families. So I think it was really positive for the school as a whole to see so much support from the community, and that was wonderful. The other thing is we're coming up on the DuPage Division fall meeting, which I think most of us are scheduled to go to, and in the board docs is the letter that came from them about electing the officials, which we have to cast a vote. So just take a look at your board docs. We're not that active with IASB that we really have anyone different we would nominate, so I don't particularly see any reason to do anything other than what IASB is suggesting, but
Go rogue.
we do get a vote. So I would be casting that vote, so, if at some point before October 4th, if there is anyone that has an issue or problem, please let me know. That way we can figure out how to deal with it.
I say yes to what the IASB suggests.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? All right. Are there any public comments? No, I'm sorry, education. SACID update, Mr. Price?
SACID meeting, August, was a very routine meeting, just kind of a lot of regular business. Dr. Volpe gave a presentation about SACID's Orientation Day, and it is one of the days where all the SACID staff come together, and I think there's about 450 of them. They typically meet at the NIU campus, I think in Naperville, to all get together. As you may or may not be aware of, they're scattered throughout the member districts, many of them, and so they don't come to a common workplace, and a lot of their work is on the road. They do a lot of traveling between different districts to provide services. So this is a great opportunity to kind of kick off the year and bring everyone together and talk about their programming. In conjunction with that, they host a wellness clinic for the benefit of their employees to kind of promote healthy lifestyles and blood pressure checks and that sort of thing to kind of go along, I think, with insurance. And I think it might be part of their recommendations from their insurance companies to kind of, as a healthy living initiative type of thing. There was one special recognition for a SACIT employee, Mrs. Sheila Grogan. She's a multi-needs nurse, and she was nominated and named Outstanding Nurse in the Nation for Special Needs Students. And she received recognition at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. And so that's a nice opportunity to highlight SACIT and the quality employees that they have. Subsequent to that particular recognition, she also received recognition from the, she was named Illinois State School Nurse of the Year for 2010, 2011. So she got two big awards kind of over the summer. So it was a nice, I guess, I want to say coincidence, but not. It wasn't really. It was her hard work and her dedication to serving the special needs students of the cooperative that helped bring about this recognition that she deserved. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And
Just one other thing. Linda Clowder reminded me this morning that we are going to be doing preschool screenings, and typically we do those in the Manning Community Room, and there's a conflict, and we have a tendency with South to forget that we have this building in our district, and so we're actually going to be using South Elementary for the preschool screenings. And then in addition, there's also some staff development training that Linda is going to be doing as well later in the year that will be utilizing South. And we have a tendency to forget we do have a space to conduct other meetings in, and we have a tendency to forget that. So I thank you, Linda, for reminding us of that and scheduling those events.
And thanks to Mike for touring me again. It worked out great, so thank you.
okay, are there any other public comments? The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
Oh.